Always remember to unmute ourselves. Always a tribute. Hey, welcome. Lovely to see you all. And we're down in London at a 6-day training, process work training. So we're in the same screen here. And I love to see you. And today's session is probably the most kind of crucial one in that it's about how we do assemblies differently. We can all do assemblies and try and achieve ends and try and get somewhere, but this is about how can we be present? How can we do this differently? How can we meet each other differently? Um, And so this is about shifting to a kind of power with assembly rather than a power over assembly. And really, it's about not using anything, ourselves included, as a means to an end. And I'm the worst culprit I know at this. I forever overriding my needs to try and achieve good things or not good things, and learning to actually take care of myself and to be present has been quite a journey. So I maybe you've already made that journey, in which case that's fantastic. But that's really what this session is about. How do we shift to a power with how do we practice getting out of thinking and being as usual? So we often talk about business as usual, but it's being as usual, thinking as usual that really catches us in that cycle. So we're going to start with a check-in in fours, and then we're going to give it a kind of introduction to the session, and then go into a kind of mindfulness exercise of really being in our bodies and imagining the future differently, and have a chance to reflect on that and whether that worked, didn't work, um, and then move into a process of how do we create safety? How do we create safety in a space? How do we create safety in a group? How do we create safety in an assembly? And that's quite a challenging question. As soon as you say how do we create safety, you kind of become aware of how risky things can feel. Um, so that's me doing the intro. He was going to do just about everything else, right? So this is me just introducing this session. And I guess I just wanted to give an illustration of the kind of the power over bit. So this morning I was taking my grandson to school and he was getting very cross. And I noticed myself getting very cross in response as well. And then suddenly remembered that his dad had said that yesterday he had a fight in the playground. And he was cross about going to school because he was going to a situation where he had quite a lot of fear around it. And I just noticed myself shifting from that kind of control, power over get you to school and get me to a training I need to get to, shifting from that to, oh, how are you doing? What's up? And it just moves straight from a control to a being with. So in a way, it's quite simple what we'll be looking at today, but it's quite a profound, for me anyway, a shift from uh, controlling for all the best reasons, but actually harmful effect to actually really, really being with. So yeah, check in.
Yeah, check in, and we were going to suggest that people use the council process that we did last week.
Yeah. So the idea is to get into fours and just to share how you're feeling, or if those of you who were here last week, we were suggesting that you ask somebody what hope they had in the political system, what alternative political system they might wish for, um, or just what helps you get out of stress, what helps you to soothe yourself. So those three questions: just how are you feeling, which is a straightforward one. What hope do people have in the political system, and for an alternative one, and what do you do to soothe yourself? So those are the three questions. And in the council, if you remember last week, the council circle process is just basically speaking from the heart and listening from the heart. And the most important thing is the listening. Relearning how to listen is the most crucial thing, and sharing the time equally. So speaking from the heart, listening from the heart, sharing time equally. And the idea is to have 5 minutes each in a group of four, to speak and to be heard and to listen. So yeah, I hope that's okay. Joanna, do you want to bounce us into these groups and then we can take it from there and start?
coming back thick and fast now. I think that's probably everybody. Hey, welcome back. So, yes, so I'm going to do a little bit of chat. And I'm aware that for some people, some, possibly all of what I'm going to say is not new. I still think that it's useful to say it. And part of why I think it's useful to say is because it's to do with the role of the facilitator, which we'll go on to more next week. And one of the strongest things that a facilitator does that isn't about the program, it is around culture setting. And you do that as a facilitator by how you show up and by the kind of things that you say to kind of frame the work that you're going to do together. So it's important to say this stuff, even if we all know it. I think if we all knew each other really well, then we could really do a shortcut. And this is still a bit of a shortcut because as Justin said, we're on this course, we're on day 2 of 6. And as far as I can, it's one of those things where you're on a course and it's like around the same area as this. And so it's throwing all my thinking up in the air. And then I'm coming here trying to sound like I have any clue what I'm talking about.
Se vou comer frango.
Oh, oh, and yes, thank you. Yeah, not muted. Yes, so that culture building piece can be very long, and you can make shortcuts as well. And if you make shortcuts, you may need to revisit it with people. Yeah, one of the reasons that this session feels really important is that it would be really easy just to go, oh, assemblies, that's a different way of doing politics, and we'll all just do assemblies and we'll get a different political system. But the way in which we've all been brought up within a system of power over means that system is alive in us, whether we know it or not. And so this session is really about how do we both understand and start to explore power over in ourselves? How do we start to engender and nurture and grow power within ourselves and between us? And how do we create processes which do their best to not trigger power over responses, whether that's power over or power under, because power over needs power under to work. If you pull a power over move on someone and they just go, well, I'm not doing that, they can say it very nicely or they can say it very angrily, but you can't do power over on someone who won't play power under. So that those things are kind of inextricably linked, and we all need to go through our own process of unpicking that. And in our assemblies, we need to try and create processes that enable that to shift or to start shifting. So it's challenging. We're trying to unpick a system that we're in while we're in it, and it's difficult. And we need to accept that we will often make mistakes. And so that, again, is a really good attitude going into an assembly, whether you're a facilitator or a participant, to accept, we're going to get this wrong. And that's okay. It's okay to get things wrong. One of the numbers that power over pulls on us is that we have to get it right all the time, that we have to always know what we're talking about, that we have to be authoritative, that people who are in charge have to have everything kind of all the backups, all the counter arguments already done. But this is about a more lively way of being together that sometimes means that we make a mess. So being reassuring to oneself, because many of us have a kind of inner perfectionist that thinks that we should get it absolutely right, even if we're fine with other people getting it wrong. And also doing that for other people when you're holding the space is an important ingredient in this creation of more equal power structures, processes. So the way that we understand the way that power over makes its home in us, it really draws a lot on understandings about trauma. This is not necessarily something that we speak about a lot in assembly processes because it's still quite countercultural, it's still quite sensitive, it can feel like a lot, and many people aren't particularly ready for it. But it's important to tell people who might be running assembly processes that this is where we're coming from. And obviously you make your own relationship with it. But so trauma is a physiological process. It's something that happens in us, in our bodies, really without any conscious control. And I'm going to give a really potted version of how it happens. I'm not a neurologist, and I have a very simplified version of how this happens, but I find it super helpful. And it's basically that when something happens to you that is overwhelming, either because it's just so big, so like in a lot of the ways that we tend to think about trauma is like PTSD, people who've been in a war, people who've been attacked, that kind of like obviously overwhelming, terrifying thing happened to you. But actually, particularly when you're a small person, when you're a baby and a child, a lot of things can feel overwhelming that don't seem to adults to be overwhelming at all. You're coming in with really no knowledge of this world, of how things work, and you're piecing things together and making patterns. You're learning how gravity works. You're learning how you stand up and walk. And the brain at that age is patterning all the time. So it can pattern in quite small things, or things that seem quite small. Like Justin was talking about last week, this sense of being alone. For many children who grow up in the global north, we're left to ourselves, we're left to cry, we're put in our own rooms, in our own beds. And that is sewn into our patterning, that sense of aloneness, of I have to make do by myself. So and there are lots of things, and many of them are around power over. So very often our forms of parenting are quite authoritarian. Parent gets to say what the child has to do, whether or not it's to do with the child's immediate safety. It's like, it's dinner time, you're eating. It's bedtime, you're going to bed. And there are parents who will negotiate around those things, but there are lots of parents who don't. And that can sew into our personalities a sense that this big person will tell us what to do. We learn that right the way through school. The way that we get taught in school is all very top down. There's almost no decisions that kids are allowed to make that are at all meaningful about like when they learn, what they learn, who they learn with. I think there are attempts to lessen that, but fundamentally you have to go to school. Most people don't get a choice around that. So there's all of these things that we learn right the way through our lives, that where power over is a baked in assumption. And it's kind of like we show up to this meeting that is our lives, and the contract has already been made, and we don't get a say. And we don't even, it's so sewn in, it's so assumed that we don't even know that contract's been made, and we don't ever get to think about it. So what we want to do in assemblies is not do that. We want to show up in a space and say, how do we want this space to be run? Or here are some ideas about how we're going to run this space. And And how, what do you think about that? We're going to go on later on in this session, hopefully, if we don't run out of time, to look at group agreements. And these can often be really, really tick box, but I think they're one of the things that can be really helpful to this consciously making a new contract together, a power with contract. So to go back to the to the way that all this lives in our bodies, it's obviously really, really different how this lands in us, depending on where we're positioned in society. One of the things that this system of domination does is it keeps us separate from one another by ranking us. So in general, if you're a white middle-class male, there are lots and lots of things that you can do without ever being questioned. There are lots of things that you get in life without ever even having to ask for them. And as a white middle-class woman, you get a lot of those same things, but not maybe the same things as the guys do. And so there's this pecking order. There's this system of rank, and it's complex because sometimes you've got some bits of privilege, but not other bits. And it's something, as we're doing on this training, that you can easily spend 6 days unpacking, probably a whole lifetime. And what I'm seeing on this training is that if we don't talk about that, then some people are going to walk into an assembly assuming that they have a right to be there and they have a right to speak and be listened to, which actually is a fair enough assumption in a thing like a community assembly. You would want everybody to feel like that. But lots of people have not had that experience in their lives and will not necessarily be feeling so welcome, will not necessarily be feeling so confident that their voice will be heard or appreciated. And so finding ways to acknowledge that we're coming in with different expectations, and that together we need to build a new expectation where everybody's voice matters, where we listen to everybody, where we do our best to share power. And if we're not sharing power equally, then we really notice it, and it's okay to bring it up. These are the kinds of things that we can build into assemblies to make them more inclusive and more likely to feel like welcoming places that a wide range of people can participate in. And we need that. We're dealing with complex problems, whether it's with a community that's got cold and drafty houses, or a community that's worried about sea level rise, or a community that's having their local park destroyed, or whatever it is that your assembly is focusing on. If we don't have a diversity of voices, then we're just speaking in our own echo chambers. So we need to find ways to make participation meaningful for everybody. There's another group or part of the picture that almost always gets left out. And I want to bring it in without having very clear answers as to how to include it. And that is the natural world. It's still super countercultural to have somebody in assembly speaking for the birds or for the land or for the sea. There are places where that happens, but in most communities in the UK, it would be a very small subsection of people that would kind of go, oh yeah, well, of course the sea gets a voice. And we haven't experimented enough for me to feel really confident and be able to say to you, well, this is a really good way of bringing that in. So this is a leading edge for us around how do we include the other players, because humans have such an impact on the other species and in ecosystems that we live alongside. And we hardly ever listen to them. So I wanted to include that, without having loads of answers. The three things that I wanted to bring that feel really, really important for us to facilitate and support in assembly processes are listening, understanding our reactivity and having options around that, and self-reflexivity, being able to really notice what's going on for us. And those last two are quite connected with one another. What I often say to people at the beginning of assembly is just like, notice what happens to you when someone says something you don't like. Because very often it's going to be one of three things. You're either going to go on the attack, you'll get angry and you'll want to say, well, you're wrong. What about this? Or you're going to want to get away. You're going to want to run and just say, oh, actually, I've had enough of this conversation. I'm off. Or you'll zone out. You'll just go, let's change the subject, or I'm not listening anymore, or and so when one of those things is happening to you, notice it and consider whether you have choices here, because any of those things are going to stop you from listening to that person who has a different take on what it is to be human in this moment than you do. And very often creating space around that and asking questions around that, being curious rather than being reactive, can get you to a different place in that conversation than you might normally get to, because you're doing the thing that you always do. So that using that kind of language feels like it's a way of drawing people into an examination of, how do I respond? How do I react? What happens to me when I get triggered? And I think more and more, I think that actually there needs to be a part of the assembly that early on where we actually unpack that. We don't talk about the issue we're here to talk about. We talk about how we're going to talk about that issue and what's important. And it's this whole thing about, if we don't talk about that, how are we ever going to do anything differently? Because we're so well trained. So what I wanted to do next was a little bit of a mode change. I really love doing meditations, and often, though not always, try to bring them in with mixed results into assembly type processes. I wanted to I wanted to take you through a little process where we go inside and think about stuff. And I also wanted to do it in a way that we might do in an assembly. So we're going to do a little kind of future scan. And then you'll get into twos and just talk about how it was for you. So while you're doing this, assuming you want to, because it is entirely voluntary, and if this is not the kind of thing you like, please feel free to go and make a cup of tea. It'll take approximately 5 minutes. Tea, whatever you want. Turn the sound off. Do something else with yourself, or take notes. It'll take about 5 minutes. And while you're doing it, see if you can also notice, oh, that bit was really difficult, or oh, I like the way she said that, or this whole thing just freaks me out, and nothing Eva has said has made me not freak out about this. What could make that different, or could nothing make that different? So yeah, bit of self-reflexivity. Okay, I want to dive into this because of time. So it could help if you feel yourself moving away, moving back from the screen a little bit. You may want to switch your image off. You're super welcome to do that. So just moving back into your own space, and even into your own inner space. if you feel comfortable doing that. And you may want to close your eyes or just look down so you've not got so much visually coming in. And if you just notice your breath without trying to change it, that's sometimes quite difficult. Just notice it coming in and going out. Really, really spotting where you feel it in your body. Could be in just one place, or it could be in lots of places in your body. And it could feel quite tight, or it might feel quite easy. So just notice the quality of your breath. And maybe just slow it down just a touch. And notice whether that changes anything in your body if you slow your breath a little bit. If you do a very quick scan through your body, just noticing where you might be holding some tension and giving yourself permission to let go of some of that. Just for a minute, just take a rest. Just don't do anything. You're not appearing on Zoom. You're not focusing on the outside world, just on your own inner space. And I'm just going to take you on a really short walk through time. So we're going to imagine, I don't know, maybe imagine a time machine that you can just hop into, just happens to be lying around. You can sit in it or on it, and it's going to take you 15 years in the future. So maybe there are bells or whistles or switches. But somehow, in your mind, in your imagination, you find yourself 15 years into our future. And you're in your same place. You're wherever you are just now, but time's gone by. And maybe it's also the morning. So take a wander around the place that you're in. And notice to begin with whether you've gone into a future that is based on your fears or a future that's based on your hopes. I wonder if you can even flip between those. If you can look at the same scene, the same street or countryside or whatever it is you're looking out of. First with the eyes of your fears, and then with the eyes of your hope. And I'm just going to leave you for 30 seconds to look around wherever this place is that you are. And notice that, give yourself a chance to flip between those two states of hope and fear. So wherever you find yourself now, if you can make your way back to your time machine, and do whatever the time machine needs to make it bring you back to this evening in your chair. And just take another, last 15 seconds of enjoying the feeling of relaxation. And appreciating your inside space, the space that happens when you go inside yourself. And then start to think about making a connection back out into the outside world and with the screen at whatever distance feels comfortable to you right now. So we will just pop you very momentarily into a room with somebody else so that you can talk about how that was. And there is no right way to have experienced that, even if there wasn't very much in it at all. You can talk about how you find these kinds of things. You'll get, yeah, roughly 5 minutes each, maybe a bit less once we've done the faff of getting you into breakout rooms and then out again. So think in terms of maybe 4 minutes each way. So, and I would like you to use what they call active listening. And you can spend a long time talking about active listening, but it's really just listening. It's really just listening to the other person, not focusing too much on your own thoughts. And really, really taking care with what this other person is telling you. You may be somebody who likes to listen to the detail, or you may be somebody who likes to kind of draw back and listen to the kind of meaning and the overview of what somebody's saying, but just really paying attention and not interrupting while that person's speaking, and then swap over. Yeah, and then we'll bring you back, and then we'll go into a break after that. So you should have an invitation on your screen to join a breakout room. It looks like we've got 3s in some. That's okay. Everyone who's here, are you seeing I like Leith forever. It's good. Are you seeing the option to go into a breakout? Anyone having problems?
Hi, sorry, I'm not saying it, but I just literally joined the meeting about 10 minutes ago. I've just been walking home, so I just caught the last half of that sort of meditation.
Okay.
Door,
yeah.
so.
Yeah, I think maybe still good to join in with somebody and just check in, just say how you're doing. Vicky, are you stuck?
Well, I ended up on my own.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you can go with Leith forever. I'm sorry, I don't know what your name is.
Thank you.
But they've just arrived.
You know, evenly, allocating things, that's not necessarily the same thing as equity, because for some people it's very easy to use all that, and for other people they're starting from a different place, in which case to make things equitable, perhaps they need there's a picture that illustrates this kind of like, is everyone the same height? Some people might need a higher box to stand on to get to the same height. So just I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but just those two concepts are not the same. But what are we going for here? Is it about having equity of space or equality?
Lovely, that's great. Brian.
Yeah, I often find to think about things in terms of extremes. So if we had a workshop or an assembly and someone's taking all the time, that would be an extreme. But the other extreme is somebody being allocated their time and not saying anything. You know, so how would that work out? So I would say that what's needed there is that the facilitator is assisted by another in the group to help shut down the person who wants to take all the time in the most convivial way possible, you know, because it might be that a person has trauma at the time, and maybe abandoning the whole workshop is necessary for bringing that person forward and bringing them into the assembly. Because much of this harder work, I think, is about bringing people on, not shutting people up. So a strict rule for me would be very, very difficult, because I want to bring people on board and not to switch them off by having a rule. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I think you're really right. And I think again, it's that judgment that one needs to make the whole time, because speaking a lot can also be a result of kind of privilege of thinking that you deserve to, you know, the space, you're used to being listened to, you can go on at length. But it can also be a result of trauma or not having been listened to, and suddenly there's a space for you and you really want to use it. Or also people who are sorry, so someone's told me the word for it, but like who think by speaking, and they don't necessarily know where they're going or what they're going to say at the end. It's just like, it's got to get out there, and that can be difficult for other people, but that's the way that person's is going to be able to meaningfully participate. So it's not easy and it's not simple. And I think one of the things that we learn in this assembly, you know, we are trying to really change our experience of decision making together, is that there's a lot of tolerance. We're constantly having to tolerate difference, tolerate people thinking and feeling really differently to us. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't completely just make us want to run away and hide, so that we get enough of our needs met, but we're also able to build the resilience to be with things that don't feel natural or how we would want them to be. But it's all a negotiation.
Yeah, and the other magic of that, though, is that if you are including all those voices, then your own diverse voices get included. So it's not just that we're all different between each other, there's lots of difference inside. So something about that inclusivity. And responding to Brian's point, I think I've certainly had experiences going off with people who are in a really terrible state. So you're giving the person the full attention they need, but they're not necessarily acting that out in the whole space, and then making sure they can come back in and have the space they need. So just, I think there are ways of responding to that particular problem that you raised there, Brian, that are quite specific.
Yeah, that comes about from support to the facilitator, so that support's there to enable them to do that.
I was just trying to make it more explicit. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Yes, and we will come back to this idea of having of the different roles of facilitation, because I think we focus a lot on the person standing up in front and bossing people around, or, you know, helping people do the things they want to do. But there's a lot to facilitation, and we've found it useful to think of that as quite a kind of expanded function that can have people doing quite different things. So being available for giving care and listening to someone who needs a lot all of a sudden, who's triggered, but not in the main group, can be a facilitation role that somebody is there to play for the whole group. Shall we move on? I'm not seeing any more hands, and we wanted to go do a little bit on this kind of group agreement, and think about a little bit about how this cannot be tick box exercise, but can be a meaningful way of talking about our group culture, how it is that we want to be together. So I wanted to share a slide that gives some suggestions, but before that, hang on 2 ticks. I'm just going to look at what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. Before that, we were going to get into into breakout groups again in fours. Please take a moment at the beginning to discuss how you would like to do the timing. And see if you can find something that everybody is happy enough with. We wanted to have a conversation for 15 minutes.
It's going to be 10 minutes because we got.
Okay, maybe more like 10 minutes. So roughly 2 minutes each, around what makes it safe for me to be in group spaces. What are the things that help me be there, that help me raise my voice, that help me do what I need to do, or what really doesn't help me. So.
And what helps me listen and what helps me to speak. I think both. How can I listen from the heart? Can I speak from the heart? But not what helps me to get the space to say the soapbox thing that somebody was mentioning, which I thought was really helpful. Not to be on a soapbox, but how to really be able to speak from myself and listen to others speaking for themselves. What makes that safe?
Okay, are we ready with breakouts?
Oof.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Joanna has been.
Thanks, Chrissy.
I hate that voice.
Right, Connie.
Yeah, we need to have you on the train every meeting, keeping us straight. Hiya, welcome back. I hope everyone managed to get their time in that. We realized that we had not taken a note of the time when we opened those breakouts, so we were kind of going, oh no, we're going to come in the middle of somebody's go and you're already talking about how stressful it all is. Anna Maria, you have your hand up. Is that on purpose? You want to say something?
Oh, we usually share, so I was already getting ready to share about.
Okay, thank you. I think because we only have 15 minutes or so left of the session, what I was thinking was I was going to show you my slide about the group agreement, and your feedback is really, really welcome, but we could do it as a kind of trying to improve the group agreement template that I'm offering. So let me share. Okay. So, oops, crikey. So this on the left is something from our handbook, and we haven't actually mentioned the handbook yet, but it's basically the kind of big book of everything we've learned, and it's something that we'll share with you at the end of this. It's got most of the stuff. In fact, it's probably got all and more of the stuff that we've been talking about in these sessions, and we don't share it in advance because then it's often people will be reading it and not necessarily present in the session. If anyone's desperate to see it, then let me know, and it's not secret, it's shareable, but this sample group agreement comes from it. I'll just go over the things that are in it, and then we've got a box here that we can put any additions or changes that people might want. So keep to session start and end times is sometimes a good one to have, to try and remind people that in breaks and things to come back, because that means that everyone can start on time. Experiment and be bold is something I often like to have, because I think we often are less ambitious than we could be about what we could do together, what change we could make. It's okay to get things wrong. We're here to learn is a kind of reassuring one that I think is really useful to have in. Value different ways of knowing, thinking, and processing. So we've talked a lot about that, with the fact that we're all different. Share speaking time fairly and value listening at least as much as speaking. Again, fairly is a movable feast, as we've been exploring. And be respectful of others even when we disagree. So these are the kind of things that have cropped up that have felt like they're really useful in assembly processes. But we're we're a group, we're an assembly, we're going to be meeting for weeks to come. So are there comments, additions, changes, reflections that you would like to add? And I can't see you while I'm sharing my screen. So I would suggest that you just butt in and say. So, oh, Anna, I can see you've got your hand up, please.
To know how to interrupt, and this is something that we talked about now, and there are ways of doing it, and it's not. We discussed how it's not about not interrupting; it's about knowing how to do it, and this can come with better awareness of a method like hand signage. So like there are ways of doing it.
Yes, so are you saying you would like to say use hand signals?
Yeah, for example, in Extinction Rebellion, we have that like very well set, and one of the hand signals is to know how to interrupt, and that's very helpful in any assembly to be able to hear and be heard.
Yes, and you offered before to share that. I was wondering whether I was going to ask on the WhatsApp chat, but I can ask you now whether you could share those hand signals next week in the facilitation session.
Absolutely, yeah, I can. We can go over it. Yeah, next week. Yeah, sure.
Great, thank you. So, anybody else like to comment on what we have here, or add anything or change anything?
Eva, we had just a couple comments in the chat that are additions. Can I read these out?
Please.
So Alex said it's possible to have the time in a breakout group. That would be helpful. So just in relation to breakout rooms, Chrissy would like to say, I'd like to add trust the process.
And the time in breakout groups, is there a group agreement way that could be phrased, or is it more about?
I think this was maybe like a tech add-on that we could have the time it, but maybe Alex, yeah, that's how I understood it. Maybe adding.
So be clear about time. Does that sound right, Alex? You happy with that? Be clear about time in breakout groups. If you want to put it in the chat, you can. Was there more, Johanna?
There's one more in the chat. Sarah said, I like the idea of passing the mic to the next person. Helps to mix things up between those who are eager to put themselves forward. So pass the mic.
Right, so passing the mic. So rather than just having people sort of popcorning, having a like almost like a circle where you get the mic whether you've asked for it or not.
Yeah, it's sort of like equitable time, and I'd be one of the people that would jump in quickly. So, great to encourage the more hesitant voices to speak first as well.
Great. Yeah, we can do that. I mean, that's partly what the council circle does, really, isn't it? Yeah, offer you the time even if you haven't asked for it. And we can maybe think about other ways of doing that in these sessions. Anybody else got something to add to this?
Yes, I'd like to say something about confidentiality, but I'm not quite sure what in this context. And I think it might be to do with being very respectful about what people have said in their sessions, not kind of being profligate with, oh, so-and-so said such and such, and just being careful with what people have shared within the group. Yeah, be respectful of it. And
Be caring with what people have said to you as part of our meetings, during our meetings.
Yeah, or what you've heard generally.
Okay. Any more?
I'm not sure if this is for the group agreement or it's more of, I suppose, like a contract between facilitator and group, maybe, but it's something that came up in our discussion. And it's about being clear about the purpose of a particular exercise and the structure of a particular exercise. So as facilitators, being very clear about what we are expecting the group to do and what we expect to come out of that exercise, whether that's just sharing between the group or whether that's, you know, a more concrete outcome or output that comes together later down the line or whatever it might be, but just being very and whether that's, you know, very structured or quite loose and free flowing, but just having that clarity for everybody in the room so that they know what to expect and what is expected of them.
Great.
You're all using this sample group agreement to give really skillful feedback. I really appreciate that. It's really well done. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Is there more? Oh, yes, there's a few more. Vicky.
See them.
A couple of things, if that's okay. One was, and it's an XR thing as well, which I think is interesting, is empathy before education, you know, in every interaction. And I was thinking about compassion for yourself and compassion in the room, and that's the sort of, I want to say prerequisite, but it's not quite the right word, but it's the tone, it's the culture, if you like. And then the other thing that I worried about increasingly actually is we're using the word, so we talk about, you know, listening rather than speaking, and I've been thinking about neurodiversity and just generally diversity, and I'm thinking about assemblies where lots of people, you know, their preference may not be for speaking, and so building in, I don't know, tools, ways that people can communicate that's not verbal. I think as a facilitator, you know, I'm relying on, you know, talking and energy, but actually other stuff. That was, those were the things in my head. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Vicky. And I totally agree. I mean, I think it's maybe not something we thought about so much in the training, but we really do put a lot of work into assemblies, into exactly that people may not want to listen to an awful lot of stuff and certainly may not want to speak. So give people other ways to participate, and maybe we'll also think about that for this training too. David, nice to see you. Haven't seen you for a long time. You're muted.
Difficult to reach my mouse pointer up to the unmute thing, yes. It was just a thought. It may not be the right thought, but there was a talk about, you know, respecting each other's privacy and so on. Something which does work in other sorts of meetings is the sort of Chatham House rules, where you can say that somebody talked about something without saying who it was, so that the idea can be discussed without discussing who it was and the motivation. Of course, that leads to then people wanting to find out who it was who had that thought. But if you can avoid that, it can be a useful way of allowing a discussion to go ahead without too personalizing it. So that might be worthwhile thinking about.
Thanks very much.
That's great.
Yeah. And Anna, and then we will need to round up because we're nearly out of time. But please.
I'll be very short. I posted in the group chat, but then I realized I actually really didn't want to share it because I thought it was really good and echoes a lot of what's said here. And it's host yourself and host others. And it seems kind of straightforward, but it did force me as a participant in a workshop to reconsider how I was present in the workshop. So by host yourself, it's really, the whole compassion for yourself that was mentioned, but also what do you need to do in order to be present? And it kind of in the workshop, and it brings back that responsibility to yourself, not to the facilitator, not to the other people in your group. It kind of a reminder of, if you're there today, be present. And if you can be, what is it that is keeping you from it? And you're the sole responsible for making sure that you can host yourself in that space, and then host others is also the idea that was mentioned. But to listen, it's a mixture of listening generously, but also inviting people when you notice that someone's unwell, or it's checking in on people. It's just, making sure that you're as compassionate with yourself as you are with others, and confidentiality also comes in that, because where does that boundary stop when you're hosting someone?
Thank you.
Well, I'm just wondering if that could be what we do between now and next week. If anybody wants to do something between now and next week, just that kind of awareness of compassion for yourself and compassion for other, and whether one gets more of a look in than the other in a conversation. I really love that. I think that's a really nice segue through, I guess, to next week and facilitation, looking at what he was calling Facilitation 101, how to work with and a kind of power with democracy and facilitate in that way, and particularly the facilitator's role and leadership in that, and how that plays out. So it's kind of very basic week looking at that before we move on to kind of design of assemblies and so on. It's I mean, as you said, it's often what people think these trainings are about. It's about facilitation, so we definitely put it in there, the basics of that, but which lots of you will be aware of, but it's always useful to reflect on. So does that make sense to you as a question between now and next week?
Yes, for noticing, for developing that self-reflexive muscle of how am I doing this? And with 1 minute over, not too bad. Thank you all very much for being here. It's been a real pleasure, and look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Very much.
Have a beautiful week. Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Bye.